important. This was a very important contribution. For some reason, for 20 or 30 years, this kind of reference to Zionism as a settler colonial movement and to the state of Israel as a state that continues the project of settler colonialism was pushed aside, was marginalized. We didn't hear about it very much in the 1970s, I would say, until the 1990s. So maybe 20, 25 years. But then, and this happens in history, a group of scholars who worked on Australia, North America, South Africa, began to see the connection between the settlers who colonized these places, especially North America and Australia, to the Jewish settlers that colonized Palestine in the late 19th century. And what was common, among many other things, was a certain logic that had to inform projects such as the Zionist colonization of Palestine or the European colonization of North America. This logic that quite famous scholars defined it as the logic of the elimination of the native, mintak ibadad al-asliyin. This logic was not easily attached to Zionism in Israel. Because in Australia and North America, for instance, you could easily see that the idea that settler colonial movements of Europeans who wish to colonize a country that does not belong to them because Europe doesn't want them is ending in, eventually ends with the genocide of the people. That happened in North America, that happened in Australia and some other places as well. And in Palestine, at least on the face of it, a large kind of genocide did not occur as a result of the Zionist colonization, but there were other ways of eliminating the native, and the most important of them was Tathir Elki, or ethnic cleansing. So the very analysis of the state of Israel as the end product of settler colonialism is very important. First of all, it explains the various stages of ethnic cleansing that Israel, and before that, the Zionist movement carried out. As you probably know, already in the 1920s, in the mid-1920s, 13 Palestinian villages were evicted by force with the help of the British police at the time from Marj ibn Amr and Wadi Hawaris. This was the first wave of ethnic cleansing. Then came the huge ethnic cleansing of the Nakba, more than 500 villages and more than 11 towns. But again, this was always a continuation of this logic of the elimination of the native. Yes, the mintak ibadat al-asliyun was part of the DNA, part of the akliya, the mindset of the Zionist movement. What changes over time, and this is true also to the period after 1967, is first of all the explanation that the Zionist leadership, before the creation of the state and after the creation of the state, provides for the actions of ethnic cleansing. It insists of providing an explanation. I call it providing a pretext, usually. The most important word in the Israeli Zionist dictionary for explaining a particularly brutal act, whether it's ethnic cleansing or a massacre, is retaliation. Retaliation. They always pointed out to a certain action by the Palestinians as justifying the reaction. The reaction could be the massacre in Kibya, the killing in Samoa, the massacre in Deir Yassin, killing of citizens of Israel in 1976. And the list goes on and on. But what is interesting is that the settler colonial project of Zionism, quite different from other settler colonial projects, found it necessary to explain to itself and to its allies in the world that whatever it was doing, it was a reaction, red فعل, that it was not what I think it was, implementation of an ideology of elimination. And this, I think, what is so important of what goes on in Gaza today. Because as you probably noticed, the immediate reaction of Israel to the Hamas operation on the 7th of October was to say, we are reacting, we are retaliating. And the retaliation, at least for Israel allies, sounds logic or sounds as a logical explanation for what Israel does until a certain level. There's a certain level of retaliation that becomes suspicious, that you as an observer become suspicious. Even if you are pro-Israeli, you say, really, is this still part of the retaliation? Is this still part of red al-fi'l? It might be the number of people that are being killed. It might be the level of destruction that is being inflicted. And no less important, it might be the language that the policymakers in Israel use to explain what they are doing in the Gaza Strip. And I think that although not for me, and I think nobody who's with us this evening, we needed this kind of a terrible and horrific and the worst kind of Israeli criminal brutality against the Palestinians to convince us that also in the past, what Israel described as retaliation was not retaliation, but the implementation of the logic of the elimination of the native, which is so typical to settler colonial movement. In my book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, I showed how David Ben-Gurion, the leader of Israel, and who began or orchestrated the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in February 1948, after a month or so, lost patience with explaining actions of ethnic cleansing during the Nakba as retaliation. He led the Zionist leadership to adopt a master plan, Plan D, that was every word in it, if you translate it to actual actions, had nothing to do with retaliation. It was a clear, systematic plan for getting as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. So there are periods in history when Israel, the government of Israel, is not even using the excuse of the retaliation, especially when they are engaged in a large-scale operation against the Palestinians. And the same, I think, happened in Gaza. Now, this is the bad news of what we are seeing in Gaza, that one of the most important characteristics of a settler colonial movement, and it doesn't matter whether it was active in the 16th century or in the 21st century. One of the most worrying aspects of settler colonialism is that it cannot cease to act until it completes its vision of taking over a land and getting rid of the native population. 1948 was not a complete ethnic cleansing. Half of the Palestinians still remained in Palestine. And the Palestinians who did not remain in Palestine in the refugee camps recreated the Palestinian national movement. So it was not a complete success. And then came this territorial appetite in 67 to take the parts of Palestine that were not taken in 48, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but then they incorporated a large number of Palestinians again. And whatever they have tried to do, and all they used were inhuman, immoral violations of international law, it still did not downsize significantly the number of Palestinians, did not weaken the Palestinian resistance and resilience, and the ethnic cleansing although it was used also in 67 and after 67, did not result in a complete elimination of the native, as nearly the white settlers have succeeded in doing in North America, in Central America, in South America, in Australia, and New Zealand. Now, this is the bad news, that there is this motivation to use as a pretext a text such as the Hamas or any other kinds of situation to complete the elimination of the native. Now, it's not that the ideological rainbow of Zionism is made of the same cloth. They are not all the same, and we know it. They're not all the same. And although I think they are all committed to the logic of settler colonialism, I don't think they share the same tactics of how to get there. For example, what we might call liberal Zionism or left Zionism would say we can give up some of the territory in order to have an absolute majority, or we can close the Palestinians in enclaves, like big prisons, or your open prisons, and there's no need to expel. There's no need to genocide. And then you have the messianic Zionists who are willing to go all the way in destroying, killing, and ethnically cleansing. And we once thought that the messianic Zionist would be a marginal force within Zionism. But I think we learned in the last 20 and 30 years that this is the most powerful force in Israel politics. So to sum up this part, I think that I don't need to go too long about explaining that what we see today in Gaza, the genocide of Gaza, is not a retaliation for the 7th of October. It's a sense of those who are leading the Zionist state from a military or political point of view, that they have an opportunity to move forward with the elimination of the native in a dramatic and drastic way, because this is the circumstances that allow it. Most importantly, I think, they read, I hope wrongly, I'm not sure they did, they understood the immediate solidarity shown by governments in the West or governments in the global North to Israel on the 7th of October. If you remember, they put the Israeli flag on the Eiffel Tower. They put the Israeli flag on Parliament House, on the Big Ben in Britain. They understood all these kinds of gestures and all kinds of expressions of support by Western leaders as a carte blanche, as a license to do whatever they want in Gaza. And that gave this motivation to say, wait a minute, we have here an historical opportunity, maybe to get rid of all the people in Gaza, and in the way also kill many Palestinians. And at the same time, and the world does not pay attention to it, unfortunately, I know many of you live there, to totally change the mode of action in the West Bank against the Palestinians, hoping that the international community is focused on Gaza and doesn't look at the West Bank, and also change the way the Palestinian citizens of Israel are being treated, creating a terror regime that does not allow any expression of solidarity with the Palestinians by the 48 Arabs. All this is done in a sense, and this is the sense that these Israeli policymakers have, that they have a rare historical opportunity to do much more than they have done in the past to complete the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. But I think this dark moment, and this is a very dark moment, as Dr. Warda said, is also a moment where we can see a light in the end of the tunnel. And the light in the end of the tunnel has to be carefully described so that we are not creating any false hopes, or that I don't want to sound as a relentless optimist, mutafa'il, who is just talking about wishful thinking. No, what I'm trying to do here is really based on 45 years of professional career as an academic. I really want to tackle it as an academic and not as a political activist, and not as someone who really wants to see a change. Of course, this all influences what one say, but I feel confident enough to say what I'm going to say now as a professional academic, not just as an activist, and not just as an anti-Zionist Jew committed to the liberation of Palestine, which I am. So what I can see very clearly is that the Zionist project, or the leaders of the Zionist project, do not seem to understand that their idea of exploiting the events of 7th of October in order to push forward a dream of a Palestine without Gaza, for instance, is actually exposing the cracks in the wall, cracks in the building, which is called the Zionist project. You can, the cracks, you know, these weaknesses in the structure, in the mabna of the Zionist mabna, were already there before. But the 7th of October has widened them, made them even bigger. And let me talk about 4 or 5 such, I call them indications, mu'asharat in Arabic, indication that we are seeing the beginning of the end of Zionism. But before that, let me warn that as an historian, I'm fully aware that a beginning of a collapse or disintegration or an end of a certain project can be a long period. It can be a long period. It is usually a very dangerous period, because the project that disintegrates fights for its survival in a very ruthless way. We have seen it in South Vietnam, and we have seen it in South Africa, the 2 most important examples. But that doesn't mean that the process is not a process of disintegration. It's just important to say that this is not a short process, and this is not an easy process to watch. But what are the indications? The first indication is that if you take away from the Israelis a vision of continued war, bloodshed, and violence against the Palestinians, if you take out the Palestinian issue, there is very little in common to keep together the Jewish community in Israel as a national group. They have tried for 75 years to engineer a national Jewish identity. But what the 7th of October, and of course the whole struggle in Israel about the legal reform, exposed that there is very little in common between what you can call the State of Israel, which is mostly European Jews, secular Jews, wishing to be part of the democratic world, while not minding the continued occupation and the apartheid towards the Palestinians in Israel, and the state of Judea, Daulat Yehuda, that grew up in the settlements with a messianic theocratic vision of Israel. There is very little in common. The only commonality that they can create is the one that emerged for a month, and not more than that, after the 7th of October. No wonder you have all these theories of Muammara in Israel, that Netanyahu knew before. I don't know if it's true or not, it doesn't matter really, that he knew beforehand about the attack, and he wanted the attack because he wanted to create this false unity, because the society was disintegrating, imploding. Remember, it was not just a struggle about the nature of Israel. It was a struggle by which the financial elite of Israel, the cultural elite of Israel, the Nukhba, all these elites were relocating themselves and their money outside of Israel. There was a real crisis of identity. And this will not end because of the war. It will be intensified even before what the Israeli call the war would end. So that's one indication, the lack of social cohesion, or even worse, a social cohesion that is only based on a common enemy. And not only on a common enemy, on the need to constantly fight the common enemy. Because if the common enemy is not fighting, then all this cohesion disappears. There's a second indication, and this is the microeconomic, اقتصاد جزئي, I think we'll call it in Arabic, not like macroeconomy in Israel. Israeli economists like to talk about macroeconomics, and then they give you all these figures of the GDP and all these indicators that Israel is doing very well in the OECD. But if you go to the micro level, you find out that 20% of the Israelis are paying 80% of the taxes. 20% are paying 80% of the taxes. And among these 20%, there is a great motivation to leave. Why can they leave? Many of them have European passports. Many of them have professions that they can, do outside of Israel. And many of them do not wish to live in what they think, what I call the state of Judea, is preparing for them. A theocratic Jewish state, according to they would be ruled according to the Jewish Sharia, whatever that means. So the gap between the have and the have-nots in Israel, the addition, the huge number of people joining those who are under the poverty line, and the need that was never there before on such a level, the need to have huge financial aid from the United States, is something that is worth looking at as an indicator of disintegration. Because even if Trump comes to power in Washington, he represents the Republican isolationist American position. Not only according to Trump, if you talk to the leaders of the Republican Party in America, they don't want to fund the war in Ukraine, and they don't want to fund Israel. Their Christian ideology makes them very loyal to the idea of the Jews in Palestine, but they don't want to give the money for that. They hope that God will somehow organize the connection between the return of the Jews to Palestine and the return of Christ to Palestine as well. But that doesn't have to cost money. I think it's also important to look at the military-industrial complex in America. People are convinced that one of the main reasons that the United States supports Israel, and one understands that without American support for Israel, it's very difficult to keep alive the Zionist project. One of the reasons is the military-industrial complex in America's interest in Israel. But actually, if you look at it very closely, as some American scholars have done, you see that the whole idea of the American military connection with Israel is that American money goes to American industries in order to provide weapons and arms to Israel. Whereas other clients in the world, and there are many clients for the American military industrial complex, other clients, Zabun, right? Zabun, a client, other clients pay directly the Americans. The American taxpayers' money goes to the American military industry if they want to help Israel. But if Saudi Arabia buys weapons from Israel, America doesn't pay. America gets the money. So all these structures, which are very cynical, because nothing to do with morality, nothing to do with support for the Palestinian cause, but they are creating an economic reality and a strategic reality by which Israel ceases to be an asset and might become a liability. Another indication, and I think that's where the ICJ ruling comes into into effect is the incredible shift in the global public opinion in support of Palestine, the growth of the boycott, divestment, and sanction, مقطعة وانسحاب الاستثمارات والعقوبات هذا الحملة, the campaign of the BDS, a lot of people are joining it. And of course, we understand that as long as this kind of solidarity focuses on boycott, muqatta'a, and divestment, and does not move to sanctions, it doesn't have an effect, an impact on the ground. We can see it. With all the great achievements of the BDS movement, it has not changed anything on the ground. When does it become effective? And we know it from the case of solidarity with South Africa, when you move from the B and D, from the boycott and the divestment, to the S, to the sanctions. We were very close for the first declaration of sanctions against the state of Israel in the ruling of the ICJ in The Hague, in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Like many, I was disappointed with the fact that the ICJ did not rule that Israel should stop its fire, its operations. I think it was still wrong for the ICJ not to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. I think they were too afraid of the United States and Germany when they did it. It was not a show of courage. And if you remember, the main demand of the South African was that the ICJ would, first of all, order Israel to stop its operations. But, and this is I'll say something about it a bit later. But what I want to say here is that this is an indication that something is changing in the level of or the relationship between the societies who support Palestine and the governments who are still hesitant in really going all the way and imposing sanctions. Because the language that the ICJ used by accepting, first of all, the right of South Africa to submit this demand from the ICJ to examine whether Israel is committing genocide is very important. The fact that the ICJ ruled in a huge majority that what the South African brought as facts can definitely be defined as genocide, although they want to give Israel 30 days to show otherwise, which was stupid to my mind, but they have their own pressures on them. But nonetheless, in the long run, the ICJ ruling is just one more, and not the only one more indication of the shift from the position of civil society that is very important for Palestine, but doesn't have the power to change the reality in the ground, to the shift in the position of governments, which is very crucial, as we know, in the case of South Africa, and will be very crucial in the case of Palestine. There is another indication, and you know about it more than I do, so I won't say much about it. I think there is a potential and maybe the beginning also of a change in the way the Palestinian liberation movement prepares itself for the future. It's very clear that the Palestinian society, which is the youngest in the world, has a group of young people who want to be involved, not just locally, which is understandably because they are fighting for their life in Jenin and Nablus and in Gaza, but also want to be involved strategically in envisaging the future. In fact, if you look at these young groups of young people, you see that they have some advantages and disadvantages of the current generation of leaders and the previous generation of leaders. The biggest advantage is they can reconnect because of internet without any geographical borders. The conversation can flow all the time. And this is why I think we can detect a far more consensual vision of the future than you do when you go to the political parties on the ground, or if you look at the past of the PLO. there is a consensus there, I think, of a one democratic state. I don't know of any young person who talks about two-state solution among the Palestinians. I didn't do a whole academic research about it, but the surveys that I see, I talk about generation between 18 and 30. Between 18 and 30, it's very difficult to find many people who still support the two-state solution. In older generation, the situation is still different, but not in that generation. But that generation is the one that would lead the way in the future, eventually. The disadvantage compared, I think, to previous generation is their totally disbelief in organization and parties. They don't like organizations. We saw it in the so-called Arab Spring. They feel that organizations bring hierarchies, they bring, but I think they will have to get over it, because without a proper organization, even the best idea is getting lost. And the disintegration of Zionism that will happen will create a fawda, a chaos. And if the Palestinian national movement will not be there to fill the vacuum, the fada, someone else would fill it. Or the chaos will continue for too long. We have to take this into account. And this is why it's so understandable that when you are in Gaza, or even in Ramallah, in Nablus, your energy for strategizing from 10 or 20 years ahead is very limited, because you are surviving. But for that, we need maybe to ask the people who are not under existential danger and are Palestinians to help with the strategizing for the future, because they have the luxury, if you want, and the time and the energy to help. In this respect, I must say that one of the most important decisions that a group of Palestinians would have to take in the next 10 years are the 48 Arabs. I think it's time for them, but I don't think their current leaders would agree with me, but I will nonetheless say it. I think they are on a mafrak. They are on a juncture historically. Do they continue to play the Israeli political game? Do they see their future as being part of the Israeli political system, or do they see the future of being part of the Palestinian political system? It's not an easy decision, because each such decision has a huge price. But I think the idea, which is very common among Palestinians in Israel, that they can do both, is proving to be unrealistic and unfeasible. And I think this is something to think about. I'm not going to recommend, it's not my role to recommend, but I think this would have an impact not only on the disintegration of the Zionist project, but also on how the Zionist project would disintegrate, because of the special relationship between the Palestinians inside Israel with the Jewish community, which are different from any other relationship Palestinian communities around historical Palestine and in the world have with the Jewish community in Israel. And that Jewish community, I must say, and I even have argument with Palestinian friends on this, this Jewish community would have to get used to the idea that although it won unjustly and because of a certain historical constellation, the definition as a nation that deserves a nation state. This happened, as you know, in 1970. Although they, unlike, let's say, the Kurds or the Yazidis or the Ismailia, or you take any ethno-cultural group in the Middle East, this settler ethno-cultural group, which was not a national group, it was an ethno-cultural group of settlers that the West decided is a nation because it solved they thought it solved the problem of anti-Semitism in the West, will have to go back to its normal definition. And the normal definition of Judaism is not nationalism. We know it. Most of the Jews are not Zionists. Not all the Zionists are Jews. This whole idea that here, after 75 years, you create a nation, any political scientist should understand that this is not feasible. You create an ethno-cultural group. You do, definitely. And there is a place for all collective groups in the future. And I will end by saying that if my analysis is correct, that we are in the beginning of the end with all the dangers that I pointed out to, I want to say that when we are looking for a model, which may sound crazy to look for models that would replace the Jewish state now, where we are in this dark moment, but I really think this for me is the light in the end of the tunnel, to think about the day after, not the day after the way Israelis and Americans are talking about Gaza, the day after Zionism. This is a very healthy conversation. This is a very empowering conversation. This is a very realistic conversation. People tell me you are doing something utopian. No, this is a realistic conversation to talk about the day after. What is very clear, I think, to all of us, that the models, whatever the model we will look at, it does not exist in the West. The models are here in the Arab world, in the Eastern Mediterranean, the models of a future state, a future political entity. There is a legacy coming from the late Ottoman period, from the Arab world, where collective groups' identity were respected and also individual rights were respected. This would be a model that has to be rebuilt. You cannot buy it in a shop. You'll have to rebuild it. You have to rebuild it, and I think the one in Palestine, because it was never, Palestine was never a state. I don't want to offend anyone in Ramallah, but Palestine is still not a state. Palestine as a state can be a very different model from the Arab states and can have a very positive influence on the Arab states. So let me finish by three sentences. هذا آخر الجملة. The indications are very clear for the beginning of the end, a dangerous period, but we need to be prepared for that. And we need to not to be just onlookers. Of course, I'm talking now to the solidarity movement outside of Palestine. There's a lot we can still do to move from the level of civil society to the level of governments to make sure that what so many people in the world want to see and do for Palestine is being done and executed by the governments themselves. This would be a key in making the transition faster, less violent, and beneficial for everyone. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور إيلان. يعني نحن الوقت مش راح يكون يسعفنا كثير مع العدد الحضور. بدي أترك مجال أنا قد ما بقدر للحضور المشاركة بالأسئلة، بس بدنا السؤال يكون إذا أمكن مقتضب قدر الإمكان. معنا نحن حتى الساعة 8:45 بسبب ارتباط آخر للبروفيسور إيلان بابيه، فبدي أدخل في الموضوع، بس يعني أعطانا بارقة أمل بحذر مستر بابيه إنه ما قدرت الحركة الصهيونية من 48 لليوم للقضاء على الشعب الفلسطيني وعلى أخذ كامل أرضه والقضاء على قضيته. كان في ودها أنه القضاء التام على هذا المشروع وعلى هذا الشعب، ولم تنجح ولن تنجح، وأنه استطاعت الحركة الوطنية الفلسطينية دائما منذ 48 حتى اليوم إعادة بناء نفسها والنهوض من جديد، وهذا ما يتوقع أن يحصل، ويتوقع أنه بداية نهاية المشروع الصهيوني في هذه المرحلة، وأنه رح تكون أصعب فأصعب كلما اقترب، كما قال الدكتور إيلان، كل ما اقترب الوقت من نهاية المشروع الصهيوني كل ما استقتل، كل ما قاتل بشراسة أكثر هذا المشروع للبقاء. وقال أيضا نقطة مهمة، أنه ما بكفي المقاطعة وسحب الاستثمارات لضغط الخارجي على إسرائيل، مهم جدا أن يكون في عقوبات. طبعا أنا يعني في نقاط كثيرة بس بدي أتركها للنقاش والأسئلة والأجوبة، رح كمان نحكيها في العربي بالأجوبة دكتور إيلان بابي. باخذ أسئلة زي ما أنا شايف. ببلش من سمير حليلي، تفضل إذا بنفتح الميكروفون. اللي بده يسأل يفتح الميكروفون بليز. سمير تفضل.
مسموح هلا؟ اوكي
مسموح.
بحب في البداية أكيد أكد شكري للمحاضرة وللمحاضر اللي بنتابعه من زمان، وبيقدر يلقي الضوء بشجاعة وصراحة على قضايا عميقة تتعلق بنشأة دولة إسرائيل والصهيونية وعلاقتها باليهودية. أنا سؤالي بصراحة بمنظار شبيه في اللي حكاه، بس شوي بيختلف منظاره. إسرائيل استطاعت الصهيونية العلمانية أن تقودها لفترات تقريبا حتى نهاية السبعينات من العام اللي فات. يعني هي أنشأت دولة إسرائيل، أقاموا الكيبوتسات، عملوا الهستدروت، مؤسسات اللي طابعها علماني حضاري يهودي. هي وسمة الصهيونية، وسمة دولة إسرائيل حتى تقريبا الثمانينات، لعندما بدأ يسلم الليكود والأطراف والأحزاب الدينية ما بعده. صار في واضح شفت في آخر 50 سنة من الصهيونية العلمانية للصهيونية الدينية، واللي أدت لتحالف اللي موجود هلأ في الحكم. مش أول مرة طبعا، ولكن هذا التحالف كان أصلب، أطول، أعمق، وبالرغم من هشاشته اللي تبدو من الخارج، ولكن فرجى أنيابه وشراسته وفي رؤيته. عدم الاعتراف بأوسلو، اعتبار الخروج من غزة، حتى انسحاب شباب من غزة بيعتبروه خروج عن الأسس اللي أقيمت عليها الدولة للعودة لبلدهم الأصلي. نفس الشيء موضوع أوسلو وموضوع الانسحاب من الضفة، موضوع يعني لا يمكن التفكير فيه باعتبار يهوذا والسامرة هي أصل المشروع اليهودي القديم التاريخي. إحنا أمام شفت تاريخي صار في دولة إسرائيل أدى لانتخاب قيادة من هذا النوع، والمشكلة أنه يتوافق معها دعم كبير للمحافظين في الولايات المتحدة، وخاصة مع الانتخابات القادمة ناس زي ترامب. شفنا إحنا بالصدفة سنتين ثلاثة من حكمه، بس هلأ حنشوف إشي تاني مختلف، لأنه نفس الليكود اختلف، القيادة نفسها اختلفت. أنا شاعر أنه إحنا بالرغم من كل الإنجاز اللي صار، وعشان هيك أنا فخور بنتائج الحرب الحالية بغض النظر عن دوافعها وعن بداياتها، فخور بالنتيجة أنه فعلا قدرنا نقلب العالم لدعم هاي القضية، وقدرنا نحط خطوات أساسية في مواجهة المشروع الصهيوني. بس ما زلت شاعر بالخطر الكبير أنه الخامس ل10 سنوات القادمة من حكومة بطغيان ديني ومسياحي مسياني أمريكي ممكن تعصف بقضايا كثير في وضعنا. سؤالي له هو: هل بشوفش أو ما أو بشوف إنه في إمكانية للوصول لأي اتفاق مع هاي القيادة في إسرائيل والتحولات اللي بتتم فيها من أي نوع؟ أي اتفاق أنا قصدي اللي ينقذ المشروع اللي بتعلن عنه أمريكا، بتقول مشروع الدولتين، بتقول كذا إلى آخره. في كلام بالهواء كثير، والأوروبيين وغيره، بما فيها القيادة الفلسطينية طبعا. السؤال هو: هل هناك في أي فرصة لإحداث اختراق في قيادة غالبة مسيطرة للصهيونية الدينية بدعم من الإيفانجليكان الأمريكان وغيرهم؟ هل هو بيشوف في فرصة لنا؟
شكرا سمير. ناخذ كمان سؤالين. بروح لمحمد دحلة. أستاذ محمد دحلة. أستاذ محمد دحلة. طيب نروح لأستاذ سائد كراجة من الأردن. أستاذ سائد أنميوت لو سمحت.
شكرا أستاذ حازم على الفرصة. شكرا بروفيسور إيلان، احنا سعيدين بأنه نتحدث معك بشكل مباشر، وإلنا أنت مش بس نشكرك على كل جهودك في الدفاع عن الحق الفلسطيني. أنت شخص living example for the possibility of Jews and Palestinians to live together in a democratic Palestinian state. قبل فترة دكتور كنت عم بقرأ لرشيد خالدي دراسة عن الاستعمار البريطاني في إيرلندا. كان بيقول إنه إيرلندا كانت مختبر الاستعمار الاستيطاني في فلسطين. وأنت شايف الوقوف الدول الغربية مع الحكومة الفاشية في تل أبيب. في ضوء هذا العلاقة التاريخية يبدو إنه إحنا مش صراعنا بين الحكومة نتنياهو الفلسطينية، في مشروع استعماري عالمي. فهل أنت من هذه الزاوية بتشوف بداية نهاية هذا الاستعمار من هالزاوية؟ سؤالين سريعات، بحب إذا سمحت توضح أكثر ماذا تتوقع أو ماذا تقترح أو ماذا تريد من أهلنا في فلسطين المحتلة 48. وسؤالي الأخير في ضوء رؤيتك للواقع، ما حدث في 7 أكتوبر قديش بتشوفه عجل أو أجل أو حول بداية نهاية المشروع الصهيوني؟ شكرا.
شكرا أستاذ سائد. كمان سؤالنا خليل، تفضل بس to the point لو سمحت. أستاذ خليل.
مساء الخير، معلش انت ما انتبهتش للصوت.
تفضل.
يعني بشكل سريع وباختصار، سؤالي لإيلان انه اليوم احنا بنشوف صعود جديد لقوة اكثر تطرف في اسرائيل. هل هذا ممكن نسميه اليوم صعود اسرائيل الثالثة، واللي هي اكثر يهودية واقل ديمقراطية؟
شكرا. بروفيسور إيلان تفضل، ممكن تحكي بالعربي هلا إذا بدك.
بالإنجليزي بالعربي.
تمام
كمان
براحتك.
طيب، هل إمكانية لأي تغير من الداخل أو أي اتفاق مع هذا المجتمع اليهودي الإسرائيلي؟ للأسف أنا بعتقد ما في أي رؤية عندي لأي تغير أساسي في الموقف الأساسي تبع المجتمع اليهودي في إسرائيل. Say it also in English so that I hope I'm clear as well. Unfortunately, I think any expectation for a change within the Israeli Jewish society as an indicator for a better future, for the end of occupation, the end of colonization, the end of genocide in Gaza, unfortunately, is not valid. It's not valid. And this is an important conclusion. It's I would say it's a professional conclusion. Why do I say it's a professional? مهني. هذا نقطة وجهة نظر مهنية. Because as an activist who still has connection to the Jewish society, I will do all I can, and I'm not alone, of course, to change the position. But I have to be realistic. I cannot say that I feel now what maybe I felt in the 1980s and the 1990s, that maybe there is a chance for changing this Zionist society. No, I think that however we plan our strategy, however we want to help people to strategize, to look into the future, we have to take as a fact that the Jewish society in Israel is not going to change fundamentally its attitude towards the issue of Palestine. This is a fact. This is not something I want to happen or I know is going to happen. I think it should be factored into the analysis of what's going to happen in the next few years and should be factored or calculated for anyone who wants to strategize in order to bring an end to the Palestinian suffering, colonization, and oppression. This is, by the way, not the only case in history. We had a similar cases in history where it was clear that a change from within, تغير من الداخل, ومش شرط لتغير الواقع. This is very important. I think it's also important to understand that we were all, and this includes myself, believing, not all of you, I'm talking about myself and my friends in Israel, we somehow believed that you can be a leftist Zionist, a progressive Zionist, a peacenik and a Zionist. But the moment you understand the real nature of Zionism, you know that you cannot be a progressive ethnic cleanser. You cannot be a liberal occupier. You cannot be an enlightened genocider. You can either be anti-Zionist or you can be a Zionist. This whole idea that I once believed in, that maybe you can still be connected to Zionism and be a decent human being with universal values. This is not working. And that's, by the way, what most Israeli Jews understand. And they took a decision in 2000. What do you prefer to be? A racist ethnic state, but a Jewish one, or a democratic one, but less Jewish? They made a decision. The vast majority of them said, I'd rather be in an ethnic racist Jewish state than in a democratic non-Jewish state. That's the mindset. That's the electoral decision. That is something we have to live with and decide what to do about it. We have to decide what to do about it.
يعني بس بالعربي بروفيسور
بالعربي
يعني
طيب تفضل حازم.
يعني لا يمكن إذا خير الشعب الإسرائيلي إنه يكون شعب ديمقراطي علماني ولا يكون شعب يهودي عنصري. لا، هو الشعب اختار اليوم إنه يكون شعب يهودي ولكن عنصري. بدرش تكون، حكى بروفيسور إيلان، بدرش تكون أنت صهيوني ورحيم وصهيوني وعادل. حكى على عدة صفات إيجابية مرتبطة بالصهيونية، وقال إنه هذا بتنافى مع فكرة الصهيونية، إما أن تكون صهيوني بمعنى الشر أو غير صهيوني. تفضل.
شكرا. وهذا مش بدأ اليوم، يعني هذا بدأ في بداية هذا القرن. بس وكمان ما في كل الحديث عن مخيم السلام في إسرائيل، أن يفتش مخيم السلام في الجانب الفلسطيني، هو كلام فاضي. نحن مش بالحاجة لمخيم سلام في إسرائيل، نحن بحاجة لمخيم ضد الصهيونة في إسرائيل. Let me start with English about the United States as well. And then I'll move to the 48 Arabs that I was asked about. One thing very important to remember about the American position is that there is a lobby, في lobby في الولايات المتحدة بدأ عملياته في بداية القرن العشرين. يعني it's an old lobby. It's a lobby that exists more than 100 years. The core of such a lobby is that it doesn't have to work very hard after 100 years of existence. What do I mean by this? Someone like President Biden the lobby does not have to pressure لا يلقى ضغط على الرئيس اللوبي الصهيوني, because there's already an inertia. They have built a very strong lobby for 100 years that every politician, whether he is a president or a senator or a member of the House or a mayor of a small town in America, they know what they have to do. But this is not always working, and this will not always work. But it explains that people ask, how can Biden be so supportive of Israel now? This is not surprising if you know the power of the lobby in America, and if you know the imperialist policies of America, always looking for opportunities to come back and dominate the Middle East. But the young people who demonstrate in their millions in America, the young people who demonstrate, many of them are Jews, by the way, can be the policy makers of tomorrow. So they can be the policy makers of tomorrow. They can bring their moral values, which made them support the Palestinian cause without hesitation after the 7th of October. Not only before, but after the 7th of October. They got not confused by what happened on the 7th of October. These are the people who might lead America, at least part of American politics, towards a different direction. I already said about حكيت عن عرب 48 أنا بعتقد هذا المجتمع يكون على المفرق التاريخي، ولازم يحوز قرارات استراتيجية في المستقبل، إلى المستقبل. ما بدي أحكي ما أنا أتوقع من هذا المجتمع ورؤسائه والسياسيين فيه. هذا القرار لازم يحوزه الناس نفسهم. أنا مش مستشار للمجتمع عرب 48، بس أقول إن the only thing I was saying بس شيء واحد، الفكر إن عند هذا المجتمع الإمكانية أن يلعب دور سياسي مهم في إسرائيل من ناحية واحدة، ويلعب دور مهم في السياسة الفلسطينية من الناحية الثانية. هذا ما تكون في المستقبل إمكانية من هذا النوع. They will have to make a decision. They will make a decision. The contribution of 7 of October, yes, I think عملية الحماس طوفان الأقصى, I think exposed many weaknesses that we may not have been aware before. For instance, the weakness of the Israeli army. I mean, we should have thought about it when the Israeli army was sending 1,000 troops and 100 armored cars to catch 3 people in Muhayyam Jenin before 7 of October. There's something about this army that is not working. They're still very powerful, no doubt. But imagine what would have happened if Hezbollah would have coordinated attack on the 7th of October. How would the Israeli army react or survive? And 7th of October exposed the weakness of the government. No services, no attention by politicians to the needs of those who were, the families of those who were killed, the wounded, those who were taken to Gaza. There's a sense that the state is not functioning. And there's very little reason to think that this state and its army is going to function better in the future. I don't think it happened because of the 7th of October, but the 7th of October exposed this weakness. And nothing before exposed it like this, in the sense. It doesn't matter, by the way, unfortunately, للأسف, هذه الحقيقة على فشل الجيش الإسرائيلي لدفاع وحماية المواطنين، وفشل الحكومة توفر خدمات للمجتمع، لا يؤثر على موقف المجتمع اليهودي نحو القضية الفلسطينية للأسف. On the contrary, بالعكس، أنا بعتقد this would lead to even a more extreme politics. هل نحن نشوف إسرائيل الثالثة and so on? I really think that because what I talked about, حكيت عن يعني حرب أهلية بين دولة إسرائيل العلمانية الأوروبية التل أبيبية ضد دولة اليهود القدسية ودولة المواطنين في الضفة الغربية. أنا أعتقد هذا حرب أهلي حقيقي، وأنا أعتقد أن دولة يهودا تسيطر على دولة إسرائيل. والسبب الأول الرئيسي لهيك أن المجتمع العلماني في إسرائيل عنده إمكانيات خارج إسرائيل، إمكانيات اقتصادية مهنية، معظم العلمانيين في إسرائيل عندهم باسبورت ثاني، يعني هوية ثانية تسهل على النقل إلى دول أخرى. هذا كل شيء، كل هيك مهم في if we want to see the موازن القوة بين المعسكر الإلماني والمعسكر المتدين في المجتمع اليهودي في إسرائيل. وأنا ما أشوف أي إمكانية لنشر لنصر المعسكر الإلماني. ومنشان هيك أنا حيف على سياسات إسرائيل في المستقبل القريب نحو الفلسطينيين في الضفة وداخل إسرائيل وقطاع غزة. والخطر هو أن العمليات الإسرائيلية تجي إلى حرب منطقي كمان. يعني we didn't talk about the danger of this war to become a regional war. We have to take this into account. But of course, وهذا الجملة الأخيرة، كل شيء مربط بكل شيء. يعني ما نحن نعرف شو يكون رد الفعل في الضفة لاستمرار الإبادة الجماعية في غزة، شو يكون رد الفعل حزب الله، شو يكون رد الفعل المجتمعات العربية لهذه الاستمرار. وأنا بعتقد العمليات الإسرائيلية تستمر لأطول من سنة أو سنتين في غزة. يعني ما نشوف نهاية الحرب الإسرائيلية على غزة بكرة أو بعد بكرة. ومنشان هيك في أسئلة آخرة، شو يكون رد الفعل في المنطقة في العالم داخل فلسطين التاريخية؟ ما عندي أجوبة لهذه الأسئلة، بس بعتقد هذه أسئلة مهمة إذا بدنا نتحدث عن الرؤيات والأفق.
تمام. جولييت تفضلي.
Hello.
Hello.
You've mentioned that people in Gaza lack the capacity to contemplate essential meta aspects. Which specific power do financially and socially secure Palestinians in diaspora have to help the powerless people in Gaza? Is it possible to tell us specific aspects? Thank you.
أستاذ عبد الواصي، مش واضح عندي كامل. حموري كأنه.
أسعد الله مساكم جميعا.
مساء الورد.
أنا سعيد بحضور هذه الندوة واللقاء هذا. أنا
من وين عبد الواصي؟ من وين؟
أنا عبد الواصي حميد من اليمن.
من اليمن.
نعم.
أهلا وسهلا.
أسعد الله مساكم جميعا. أنا
الورد.
لم أتمكن من حضور اللقاء من بدايته، ولكن مشاركتي أو استفساراتي هي: لماذا لا يتم عقد لقاءات تمثل السلطة الفلسطينية وبقية فصائل المقاومة الآن، يعني في ظل المرحلة هذه، للإعداد للمستقبل أو إعداد لما سيتم في المرحلة القادمة؟ العالم يتعازر ويتكاتف ويتعاون ويحاول عقد لقاءات مع السلطة الفلسطينية بانفراد وهذا كذا وهذا كذا. أنا أستغرب لماذا لا تتم أي دعوة من الوطن العربي ولا عربية شقيقة تحت مظلة واحدة وصف واحد، وهذا استغرابي. أما التعويل على الحكومات الغربية أثبتت فشله، لأن الحكومات المتطرفة التي في إسرائيل لا يمكن التعامل معها مع أي شكل من الأشكال. حكومات متطرفة، والتعويل هو بعد الله سبحانه وتعالى على من موجود داخل الأراضي الفلسطينية وعلى الشعوب المسالمة والتي تدعو للإنسانية في العالم. هذا ما لدي.
شكرا. أحمد يعقوب أبو مرخية.
مساء الخير للجميع.
مساء النور. من وين أخ أحمد؟
فلسطين.
تفضل.
يعني سؤالي الأول إنه ما مدى الخلاف بين الشعب الإسرائيلي حول قيام أو مطالبتهم بقيام ما تسمى بدولة دينية، والجبهة الأخرى ما تسمى كما تفضل المحاضر بالدولة العلمانية، وخاصة أن الدولة العلمانية كما يعلمه الجميع أن الدعم الخارجي بيكون أقوى سواء ماديا أو سياسيا. هذا السؤال الأول. أما الملحوظة الثانية، يعني إحنا نعلم أن ما تسمى بدولة إسرائيل إنه لا تخوض معارك طويلة المدى، ولكن هذا ما تخوضه في غزة هي ليست معركة، لأنها هي ليست بين دولتين، وإنما هو اعتداء. ولكن هل لديهم طيلة النفس للاستمرار كما تفضل المحاضر لمدة سنة أو سنتين؟ وأنا أتوقع أنه الشعب الإسرائيلي أنه لن يصمد أو لن يتحمل كما يتحمل الفلسطينيين من الاعتداء. يعني ما عنده طولة نفس وما عنده صبر، لأنه أنت بتعرف أنه الحرب أو الاعتداء القائم على غزة بكلف الشعب والحكومة أموال باهظة، وكثير منهم عمالهم يعني جنحوا أو خرجوا من أماكن أو مستوطنات كثيرة، عدة مستوطنات. وبارك الله فيك. شكرا لكم.
شكرا أخ أحمد. في سؤال بروفيسور إيلان مكتوب بالإنجليزي، أنا بحكي بالعربي معلش. هل تعتقد أنه بوجود ايباك اللوبي الصهيوني في الولايات المتحدة، هل ممكن يكون في أي تأثير على السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية؟ وكيف الفلسطينيين ممكن يحضروا حالهم استراتيجيا بما فيها سياسيا اقتصاديا إلى آخره لسيناريوهات قادمة محتملة لسقوط الصهيونية، المشروع الصهيوني؟ إذا في كمان سؤال أو سؤالين باخذ، عشان يعني بعدها بترك لبروفيسور إيلان. إذا في محمد، أنت رافع إيدك من قبل ما نزلت، ولا في عندك شيء؟
يلا بسأل.
تفضل.
بتكون أسئلة بالعربي يعني ولا بالإنجليزي؟ ولا
بالعربي إذا بتقدر، مش مشكلة.
صعب علي شوي بالعربي بس مهم.
إنجليزي يا سيدي مش مشكلة.
لا
وأسهل لإيلان بالإنجليزي.
إيلان, you mentioned the BDS. I believe that the BDS is the only way that things can change actually, and we can dismantle this apartheid system. The question is, my feeling is that it's not picking up. That, you know, the Israelis have established a whole office, you know, a ministry, you know, Ministry of Strategic Affairs. That's what we know. And there are other things that we don't know within the security apparatus to fight this, because they know that this is actually what might bring about the end of apartheid or Zionism in its current status. And my feeling is that we are not succeeding enough on that front. You know, you want us to move to the S, when I still feel that we are not doing that much on the B, you know, or the D. You know, we have few examples here and there, but there's something missing. It might be organization, it might be lack of experience. I don't know what you think, if you have researched that. How can we translate that actually into, you know, into tangible steps?
شكرا أستاذ محمد. محمد هادي، بس قبل ما تحكي نحن بدنا نتشكرك أستاذ محمد، ونتشكر مؤسسة آكت على عقد هذه الندوة طبعا، وبتشكر كمان أستاذ منير نسيبي اللي ساعدنا في تنظيم هذه الندوة. تفضل أستاذ محمد، مدير عام مؤسسة آكت، تفضل.
شكرا حازم. أحكي سؤال
بعد محمد إذا ممكن.
أوكي،
فيش مشكلة.
طيب شكرا. أنا بالعكس، الشكر لك حازم، كمان منير، إيلان كان عن جد رائع اليوم مثل عادته. أنا أكثر من سؤال عم بيجيني كتير، إنه عم بيبعتوا لي إنه معقول في حدا إسرائيلي بيحكي بهاي العقلية. يمكن أنا بدي أقول لإيلان احكي لنا
محمد
أكثر.
بس لحظة محمد.
لحظة.
أستاذ جمال إذا بتحط ميوت لو سمحتوا، تحط ميوت. تفضل أستاذ محمد.
شكرا. أنا بس بطريقة كثير سهلة وبسيطة بدي أطلب من إيلان إذا بيقول لنا أكثر قديش في ناس مثل إيلان بتحكي بهذه اللغة وبهذا المنطق، لأنه عن جد في ناس خصوصا الفلسطينيين اللي بالضفة الغربية اللي بشوفوا بس المستوطنين، اللي بشوفوا بس الحواجز العسكرية، بشوفوا بس الاقتحامات، عم بشوفوا وبسمعوا اليوم لغة ما كانوش بسمعوها من قبل. قديش هذا الصوت عالي. شكرا.
شكرا أستاذ محمد. أستاذ جمال زقوت، تفضل.
شكرا حازم، وشكرا يعني بروفيسور إيلان. أنا عندي سؤالين مباشرات. وفق توقعاتك لاستمرار الحرب لمدة طويلة، هل تعتقد أنه مسألة التهجير ستتم فعليا، أم وهذا طبعا ما له علاقة برغبة الناس بالصمود ولا لا، يعني الحرب نفسها استمرت والإبادة استمرت وإلى آخره، يعني ربما يكون في شيء مختلف عن ما نتوقع تاريخيا. السؤال الثاني، أنت تحدثت عن هزيمة المشروع الصهيوني ومستقبل الحركة الوطنية الفلسطينية، وتحدثت عن يعني تداخل دور الشباب في أنه يكون في سبيس من أجل التغيير. هل تعتقد أنه الحركة الوطنية الراهنة لا زال بالإمكان إصلاحها، أم أننا أمام مرحلة لبناء حركة وطنية جديدة مختلفة بالكامل؟ لي على الأقل يعني التعاطي مع المستقبل اللي ممكن يفعل أو لا يفعل مسألة يعني انتهاء المشروع الصهيوني الكولونيالي. شكرا.
شكرا أستاذ جمال. إيلان، أسئلة صعبة، بس يعني I think you can enlighten us كيف تصوراتك على المرحلة القادمة.
شكرا.
بالفعل الكل عم بينظر على هذه الحرب وماذا قد تنتج عنه. هل سيكون هناك تهجير؟ هل سيكون هناك تهجير كبير في الضفة أيضا، وليس فقط في غزة، في الضفة والقدس؟ يعني قدرة التغيير الداخلي فلسطينيا وأخذ الشباب زمام المبادرة كما ذكرت بين 18 ل 30 سنة، بالتأكيد مش بس الصغار، كمان الكبار أصبحوا محبطين من اتفاق أوسلو الذي يطبق فقط من طرف واحد وهو الفلسطينيين، وتدير له إسرائيل عرض الحائط ولا تطبق منه إلا
ومحبطين من القيادة، ومحبطين من القيادة اللي موجودة.
صحيح. فهل رح يصمد الشعب الفلسطيني؟ إذا بتتوقع كما ذكرت حضرتك أنه ممكن تمتد المعركة أو الحرب العدوانية الصهيونية على غزة كمان سنة أو تأخذ كمان 9 أشهر لسنة، شعبنا بوضع صعب جدا فوق الأرض وتحت الأرض في قطاع غزة. هل سيصمد وعندنا عدو صهيوني لا يرحم؟ رؤيتك بروفيسور إيلان بابي، تفضل.
شكرا. أول شيء بدي أقول هذا كان الملاحظة والسؤال الأول، بس بدي أجاوب على هيك. حكيت على الحاجة في فكر استراتيجي أن يبنى من الخارج. ما حكيت عن دعم اقتصادي أو مالي، بس دعم استراتيجي. يعني معنى الدعم الاستراتيجي أن عندك المجال، إذا أنت مش تحت خطر إبادة جماعية، عند مجال لفكر استراتيجي بعيد، وهذا كان معنى الدعم الاستراتيجي التي حكيت عنه. ثاني شيء، وهذا جاء في أسئلة عديدة، أنا بتأكد اليوم أن إلفان two coalitions.
ائتلافان نعم.
إلاف واحد أو one coalition. I call it global Israel. إسرائيل في العالم إذا بدك. إنجليزي هذا it sounds better, kind of global Israel. Global Israel is the connection between حكومات في الغرب، شركات المالتي ناشونال كوربوريشن، شركات الحرب، يعني military industry, security firms، المسيحيين الإنجيليين، وبعض المجتمعات اليهود في العالم. وخصوصا اليمين واليمين المتطرف في الغرب كلهم جزء لا يتجزأ من هذا الإلاف من Global Israel. وهذا إلاف قوي. It gives Israel حماية to immunity, as they say in English, to continue its policies. But there's also global Palestine, يعني فلسطين في العالم إذا بدك. هذا إلاف ثاني. And it is part of the there you have some حكومات من الجنوب global south, المجتمعات المدنية, وحتى ناس من المجتمعات اليهود كمان في الغرب خصوصا في الولايات المتحدة. So global Palestine is there but doesn't have the same powers as global Israel. But global Palestine is important because it means that a lot of people, and this is new, this wasn't there before, see their own struggle for injustice connected to the struggle in Palestine. The most important numbers, the most important case study is the African Americans, the black people in America, that until recently were very pro-Israeli. They saw يعني الإسرائيليون كالعبيد they saw a connection between the two histories. But now most of the African Americans are pro-Palestinians. And this is true about other connections. So there is this kind of reality that you want to see a change in the powers in the agenda, الجدول في العالم. في فرق بين جدول الغربي وجدول الناس في الغرب، وبين جدول الغرب وجدول الدول الغير الغربية الشرق. ما بدي أقول شرقية, it's not Eastern, it's the global North and the global South. And this is ميزان القوات العالمية will influence our chances for liberation in Palestine. It's important to say this. Secondly, does Israel have the power to continue along, يعني عندهم القوة لمعركة طويلة في غزة? That's a good question. That is a very good question. The number of casualties is rising. It's very clear that the winter is not helping the Israeli forces, but I don't sense yet a lack of determination to continue among the Israelis, unfortunately. So I don't think that what would happen is that they will stop very soon. But I think that if we can hold on and look into the future beyond the next 2 years, which is not easy to ask anyone in Palestine, but if you can look beyond the 2 years, this is when you will begin to see the real process of disintegration. I think they have enough energy and American support for a year of action. You have to understand also what they will do. يعني الهدف تبعهم الهدف تبع نتنياهو وغانس ما بحكي عن سموتريش وبنغوير، بس أنا بحكي على الوزراء هدول في مركز الحكومة. الهدف تبعهم بدهم يحولوا قطاع غزة إلى منطقة A زي في الضفة، منطقة A مع سلطة أو بدون سلطة، هذا مش مهم لهم. وفي تهجير جزئي من الناس خارج القطاع، دم عرض من القطاع إلى إسرائيل, a small sect, they want to take part of the strip and annex it to Israel. اليمين المتطرف بده كمان توطين يهودي جديد في غزة. I think still most of the politicians in Israel would not support it. But they are pushing, they are trying now to push everyone to رفح. الآن الاتجاه الآن هو إلى الرفح، وبيحكوا مع المصريون إذا يفتحوا أبواب الحدود للاجئين على الجهة المصرية. الموقف المصري حتى الآن هو a total rejection for this idea. I don't know if Sisi, Abdel Fattah Sisi can be bought with promises of I don't know what, but the Americans can have something to promise him if they want. So I don't want to say for sure that the Egyptian border would be closed for a huge, massive expulsion of Palestinians to the Sinai Peninsula. We have to see. But I agree, in the long run, this Israeli military power will not be enough to destroy the Hamas, to solve for them the Gaza problem. But it would be a long period before we will see that this is not working. And then we'll have, I think, the big implosion, the much bigger collapse of the Israel. BDS, yes, it's a good question about the BDS. Are we doing enough? I'm saying as someone who's involved in this. It's clear that if you do something and it doesn't yet get the results, you have to double and triple your efforts. It's very clear. And I think people who are activists among the BDS movement, ناشطون في حملة المقاطعة يعرفوا هذا. يعني they know that they have to do more. Is it a matter of organization? I don't think so. I think that there is a very powerful reaction to BDS, legislation against BDS in many parts of America, in France, in Germany, now in Britain as well. So people have to be even more courageous than before to support the BDS, but I don't think they will be able to stop the BDS. And I really don't think that we will not see an S. You know, we will see the Uqubat. The Uqubat, the nature of the state of Israel today is such that even if you want to be pro-Israeli and say, yes, there are, you know, extreme Israelis and good Israelis, the nature of the Israeli action, which is very dangerous, unfortunately, is such that it would be more, every year that passes by now, it is more difficult for anyone with a modicum of decency in them to support Israel. And I see it in the Jewish communities, especially in America. It is not a coincidence that one of the most energetic group of activists for Palestine in America today are the Jews, not the Palestinians, not the
Jewish voice for peace.
Exactly. What they are doing, nobody else is doing, because they feel that they have an obligation for what their parents did as American Jews, for supporting for so many years Israel without any hesitation. This is what they feel. This motivates them very strongly, and these are the kids of the elite in America. They will be part of the policy making in America. So I wouldn't give hope about America policy and the BDS and the younger generation that would lead the PDS. There was a short question about how many are like me and so on. يعني إذا في مجموعة داخل إسرائيل تشرك وجهة نظري، وكمان أنا مش لحالي، بدي أقول أنا مش لحالي وما كنت لحالي من بداية حتى اليوم، بس للأسف هذا المجموعة صغيرة مهمة. أنا بعتقد نحن مهم، لنا دور مهم في المستقبل، بس ما عندنا أي تأثير على وجهة النظر المجتمع اليهودي في إسرائيل للأسف. أعتقد لنا تأثير كبير ومهم على وجهة النظر العالمي واليهودي خارج إسرائيل. منشان هيك نحن نتابع عملياتنا والتضامن مع الحركة الفلسطينية. We understand that we are playing an important role. It's not good, but that's هذا حقيقة. ما تسمع من اليهودي من إسرائيل يقنع الناس أكبر مما يسمعوا من فلسطيني في in certain situations. Sometimes it's easier to hear it from me than from a Palestinian, although a Palestinian can say exactly what I'm saying. But somehow I'm kosherizing. أنا حلال. in their eyes. It's not good, but it's a fact of life. I don't like it, but it's something I'm taking into account. جمال زكوت حكيت عن التهجير، هل ينجح التهجير؟ أنا ما بعرف. يعني الشرط السؤال هو مش ما تفعل إسرائيل، ما يكون رد الفعل في العالم العربي، في العالم الإسلامي، في المجتمع المدني في الولايات المتحدة. يعني هذا التهجير هو it's a crime، هذا جريمة ضد الإنسانية. This is something, and then I go to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. If Israel begins تهجير على مستوى شامل في غزة، هل محكمة الدولية في هاغ هل تكيد أن تعطي لإسرائيل شهر شهر آخر لتغير السياسات، أو it will say في صراحة you have to stop it now or there will be sanctions on you. If the International Court of Justice is going to see ethnic cleansing not only in Gaza but outside of Gaza, خرج القطة, and it doesn't do anything, this does not concern only the Palestinians. If this is going to happen, the whole global south, the whole non-Western world would lose any faith. ما يكون أي ثقة في القانون الدولي، مؤسسات القانون الدولي، قضاء القانون الدولي، والمنطق وراء القانون الدولي. This is not just a matter for Palestine. If the ICJ is not going to do something much more than it did in the next months, this is the end of international law as we know it. People would say هذا مش قانون دولي، هذا قانون غربي، هذا قانون أوروبي أو أو قانون تبع الولايات المتحدة، ما له أي علاقة للدول أخرى وشعوب أخرى في العالم. This is not just about Palestine. هذا مش بس عن فلسطين. هذا حوار عن مستقبل القانون الدولي and the international moral in the future. أنا ما بدي أكون مستشار للحركة التحرر الفلسطينية، بس أقول هيك كمؤرخ، مش not as an advisor to the PLO، بس كمؤرخ أقول جمال، المرحلة الأولى في كل الحركات التحرر التي ما نجحت في تحرير الوطن، المرحلة الأولى كان جهود في إصلاح الحركة، لا هدم الحركة وبناء حركة جديدة، بس إصلاح الحركة. في زمان أو في وقت when such a stage did not work، امتى مرحلة ما هيك فشلت، في هذا النقطة بذل المجتمع جهود في بناء منظمة جديدة أو مبنى سياسي جديد. هذا مبنى سياسي جديد. I'll give one example, and with this I will end this جولة. I talked about Arab 48. What will be the real place؟ شو يكون مكان Arab 48 في منظمة التحرير الفلسطيني في المستقبل؟ هل إذا المنظمة بدها تدوم إليها ناس من المجتمع الفلسطيني داخل إسرائيل، هل هذا معناته إصلاح المنظمة أو بناء منظمة جديدة أو من الجديد؟ هذا بس سؤال واحد، يعني في تحديات أخرى للمنظمة في المستقبل على كل شيء. بس المهم أن تكون المنظمة أو الحركة جاهزة للنقطة في التاريخ يكون فيه التفكيك النظام الصهيوني. وأقول كمؤرخ، التفكيك، المرحلة الأخيرة في التفكيك هي مرحلة سريعة مفاجئة وسريعة. It's a very quick, we know it from every case in history. When it eventually, the last phase is very dramatic, and it happens in a very short period. And if you're not ready, you create a chaos, and the chaos continues. So I think it's important to be ready and to answer already now important questions about Arab 48, مستقبل المجتمع اليهودي في decolonization, you know, all the other questions that you can, not every question can be answered, but at least there would be a mechanism for doing it. Because I'm with this I would end. With every passing day, مع كل يوم أنا مقنع من الجديد إن نحن في مرحلة النهائية للمشروع الصهيوني. ما عندي I don't have any doubt about that. And I'm not saying it with great joy, although I would like to see it gone. I really like to see it gone. And I'm afraid of what it means for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, not just in the future. We have to be alert, but we have to be ready. And all of us, if we can contribute not only to how to bring it down, but also to talk about what should come next. شكرا.
شكرا دكتور إيلان.
جزيلا جدا.
شكرا.
حازم.
شكرا دكتور إيلان. ندوة مهمة بعتقد، وإن شاء الله يعني مع أكت ومع أخونا محمد هادي، والشكر كمان لمنير نسيبة، الدكتور منير. ممكن تكون هذه الندوة مش الأخيرة أستاذ محمد، ولكن بداية سلسلة ندوات مهم جدا نفصل أكثر في موضوع تفكيك الصهيونية وتفكيك الاستعمار، لأنه زي ما ذكر أخونا إيلان لا يمكن التعايش مع الصهيونية كفكر عنصري، كفكر مجرم، كفكر وكممارسة وكنظام كحركة تريد القضاء على المشروع الفلسطيني، على القضية الفلسطينية، تهجير الشعب، على الشعب الفلسطيني، تهجير الشعب الفلسطيني والقضاء عليه. فيعني كل الشكر بروفيسور على تسليط الضوء بشكل واضح وتام. نحن ما بنشبعش من كلامك، واضح انه في كتير اسئله واليوم بس لضيق الوقت، وان شاء الله يكون في فرصه اخرى
إن شاء الله
لنسمع منك اكثر على موضوع كمان ايضا التهجير العرقي، اللي كنت حضرتك من اوائل الناس اللي كتبت من سنين، وهنا نحن شايفين هذا المشروع ماشي باتجاه التهجير سواء في غزه ولا سمح الله كمان في الضفه. اعطيتنا بارقه امل انه في امل اذا بيكون في تغيير وإصلاح في الحركة الوطنية الفلسطينية، خاصة في الجيل الشباب، وأيضا ما ننسى أهلنا في 48 كجزء من الحركة الوطنية الفلسطينية. وعرجت على كثير قضايا كلها مترابطة في بعض، تعطينا أمل إن شاء الله لغد ومستقبل أفضل، مستقبل خالي من الاحتلال والاستعمار والعنصرية. شكرا مؤسسة أكت على عقد هذه الندوة كمان مرة. شكرا دكتور إيلان بابي، ونلقاكم في القريب العاجل إن شاء الله. شكرا جزيلا لحضوركم.
حازم كنت بدي أطلب من بروفيسور بابيه إذا ممكن إنه بما إنه حكى عن الدولة الإثنوقراطية، بلكن بمحاضرة تانية يربط لنا بين أو التناقض الموجود بين أو عدم التماهي بين الدولة الإثنوقراطية وإيش قال يشعياهو لايفوفيتش، لأنه شعياهو لايبوفيتش كمان هو توقع اللي عم بيصير إذا بنروح بهذاك الاتجاه.
صحيح صحيح. إن شاء الله بتكون فرصة أخرى لحوار طويل.
إن شاء الله إن شاء الله. شكرا جزيلا للجميع لحضوركم ومشاركتكم وأسئلتكم وتفاعلكم الطيب. شكرا جزيلا.
يعطيكم ألف عافية جميعا. شكرا.
يعطيك العافية حازم.
شكرا يعطيك العافية حازم.
شكرا
يعطيكم العافية.
شكرا جميعكم.
يعطيكم ألف عافية.
شكرا يعطيكم العافية.
شكرا يا دكتور إيلان.
شكرا.
شكرا
لكم.
شكرا Professor إيلان بابي. شكرا. You have been great. I think next time we should do it on a large scale with simultaneous translation into Arabic. Maybe Al-Quds University, Munir. If Munir is still with us, I think we should do something at Al-Quds University for young generation. Not that we are not young, but we want younger, and with simultaneous translation into Arabic, so that
good idea.
That's something. And maybe we should finish by the news now coming from the Knesset, from the assembly in Binyanei Ha'umah in Jerusalem, where thousands are chanting transfer.
Yes.
And Ben Gvir saying, you are right. We should encourage them to leave.
Mm-hmm.
We should do it, and we will do it. I'm sure.
Yes, we will do it. Inshallah.
Yes, we will. Thank you. Okay. Good to see you guys. All the best.
Thank you all. شكرا جزيلا للجميع. شكرا للمشاركة.
شكرا جزيلا. بارك الله فيك. فلسطين حرة.
شكرا مارك.
شكرا. فلسطين حرة.
باي.
ضحونا على وطن. مع السلامة. يا حليلة.
هلا باي خالتي. باي خالتي.
باي جولييت. باي بنت جولييت.
باي.
تصبحون على وطن.
انتم
إن شاء الله.
تصبحوا خير. مع السلامة.
مع السلامة.